Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The following tale once had illustrations. However, the person who archived the original thread only saved the thumbnail data, meaning that the images lead to 404 pages. Nevertheless, you can clearly make out what is going on in most of the thumbnails.
I write to you, /x/ because the sun is out. It's been 3 days since I've slept. Today starts the 4th. Every offbeat moment of my life, every little jump or moment of being startled, does not compare to what I've been going through these last few days. 5 days ago, I had family visiting. We all came together to mourn an aunt. My aunt was into some messed up practices, I think. We went to her house to sort through her affairs. It's a ranch-style 2-storied thing with a basement, buckling under its own weight. Smells like a garden shed and riddled with signs of neglect. Honestly looks like a big hulking dead animal laying between 2 hills, with marshy swamps all around its back into the distance before it turns into a lot of woods. My little cousins and similarly aged niece went into the back garden to play, while we went through boxes of photos and bags of envelopes. The entire house seemed to groan. What could we expect? It's ancient, at least 80, a neighbor told us. He was walking his Great Dane past when we pulled up, giving us his condolences and making idle chat as his dog desperately tried to pull on the past. But he was fat and anchored the big dog where he stood. As we opened the last box, a dusty but recently disturbed shoebox-sized black wooden box. I say recently disturbed because it was on her dresser, and there were traces of fingers where the dust had been disturbed opening it a few times. As I pried my fingers under the lid, a high-pitched scream came from the backyard. We ran out, basically on the heels of the mothers for fear of the children. Turns out they found some dead birds, like a few dozen dead blackbirds in a pile just over the fence that separated the garden from wetland. My aunt was exactly the sort of woman you'd expect to hoard cats. But her house was empty besides the creaks and groans that sounded with every breeze that ran past it. It didn't make sense. We went back inside and my older brother was already shifting through the box. There weren't many old letters in Italian that only my dad could read. A few rings, a lock of gray-brown hair, which was in a browning envelope, what appeared to be a bird's beak, and a small black talon, or horn. It was twisted and shiny, almost like obsidian, but not transparent or as sharp-looking. There were also some old dice, the sort that looked like they were carved from bone and some other small thing, mostly notes. My dad said they were written in a really old dialect of Italian. No one speaks like this anymore. This is pre-World War I stuff. With the night approaching and the kids passing out, everyone left but me and my younger brother. We made some coffee and moved her furniture from her bedroom. He passed out on a couch, and I stayed up in the squat little kitchen and thumbed through photo albums looking for pictures of a cousin who died when we were kids. It was good to see him beaming up from the album, our arms on each other's shoulders with my brothers and his sister. She was with us earlier with her son, my niece and nephew. Her son looks so much like him. It really made me want to look through the albums when everyone left. I looked deeply into his face, round and happy. Big cheeks pulled up in that classic grin he had, squinting his eyes against the flash of my dad's crazy camera. The house gave a terrible shudder. I thought my brother had fallen off the couch. I stood up to go check on him and the lights flickered off. I had a terrible feeling, /x/, a feeling of being watched. Suddenly panic filled my eyes and ears, and I blindly groped around in the dark for anything that I could use as a weapon. My hand touched something. Leathery and dry and hairy and horrible, like sticking your hand in an urn with something dead in it, like sticking your hand in a pile of dead birds. The light snapped back on and I had my hand in the box. The lid was on the floor and my brother was standing in the hallway, asking me if I had knocked a chair over or something. We laughed, saying maybe our aunt was mad we were going through her stuff. She always hated that. He stumbled off back to bed. I looked down at the lid. It had writing on the back I hadn't noticed. It was illegible to me, though, probably in Italian again. I thought nothing of it, threw it back on its nasty contents, and stomped off to the living room to sleep in an old recliner, whose seat cushion was badly caved in, probably by someone who sat in it only a few days ago. I slept in a really shallow state of sleep. The breeze ran right through the front door, constantly making noises, constantly moving the curtains. I dreamt of children crying, dry, dead, rotting things. I could have sworn at one point that I was standing in the backyard facing the tool shed, laughing. I woke up the next morning with mud up to my shins. Was I in the backyard? My hands were filthy too. I didn't recall. I only remember being cold and skeeved by the thought of having my hands in that box. I washed up, went about boxing up her possessions. My brother woke up later. I asked him if he remembered me getting up at some point. We used to share a room when we were kids, and he'd tell me if I ever sleepwalked, and I'd tell him if he ever said anything in his sleep. He said he only remembered the crashing sound that woke him and me freaking out in the kitchen. Fine. We continued to clean and box up things until the family came by with lunch. The day went normal. I went back home that night. But during the drive home, I felt terrible. Something told me I should go back. I needed to look through that box again, what felt so leathery. Why was I covered in mud? What the hell was in the tool shed? These thoughts followed me home as I drove through the dark roads. I got home and tried the lights. Nothing for a second. I stood in the dark, my breath in my own ears. Panic was building again. I stood perfectly still listening. Only my heart beat and my panting. Then the lights flickered on. My couch was overturned and my TV was on its face. Nothing was missing. Just my entertainment overturned. I was shaken and thought about calling the police. I ended up sitting on the love seat with a bat my nephew left over until the sun rose. All the clocks blinked 12. My cell phone told me it was 5 a.m. I made coffee and waited for the sun. The windows were inky satin. Staring out at them, I imagined faces. Scary ones first, but then I tried to picture my cousin and the days we spent playing in that yard. I couldn't stop thinking of laughing in front of the shed. It occurred to me that I've never been in it. Restless, hopped up on caffeine, I clutched my keys tightly. I'm pretty introverted and spur of the moment rarely happens with me. But I didn't want to be in my home alone. Not with this shit I found. My couch overturned and my TV broken. I don't have any animals and no real enemies besides some old exes who hate me for the sake of it. Cursing myself, I went out to my car. I drove back the half hour and found myself in my aunt's driveway. The house and surrounding trees have a terrible silhouette against the inky sky. I tried the door. The knob didn't even budge, the key wouldn't fit. I stalked around the back fence. There wasn't a gate. You just had to walk around. The ground was soft and wet, muddy. I tried the back door. Stuck. No keyhole either. You had to enter the front to open it from the inside. I heard something crunch behind me. Something running up behind me. I turned with my fist raised. The only movement was the branches of the trees. The wind is tossing them slowly over one another. Then, movement out of the corner of my eye. The shed door was hanging open. I started moving towards it. The damned shed. My mouth was all but twitching. The ground was soft and full of fallen branches and up to your knees with weeds. Walking on it felt like wading through little dead things, horribly soft with the occasional finger-thick branch cracking under my boots, a horrible texture in the dark. I was halfway across the yard. I'll never forget this. Halfway to the shed when there's a buzzing in my ear, like a fly. No many flies. I waved my hands blindly around my head when suddenly it hits my nose. The stench of decay, that sour, bitter smell that tells you something died here. Was I going crazy? I almost laughed. My stomach dropped, remembering my dream. I was laughing here last night. My skin crawled as I took another step forward onto a cluster of twigs. It felt like I had stepped into a tiny rib cage. Looking down, I realized I had. There were birds, staring up at me through eyeless sockets. I exclaimed and stepped backward. It felt like I walked into someone. Spinning and horrified, I dropped to a knee. I stared into the darkness, wide-eyed, looking for what I thought I bumped into. I was alone besides all the dead birds and flies. I turned on my cell for light, spun around to my feet and continued on to the shed. I was sick of this paranoia. I was sick of being afraid of the dark like I was 7. I wished I had my nephew's bat. The shed door was only open a crack. The breeze had all but pulled it shut. I imagined inky black fingers slowly pulling it closed, anxious to shut it on me. I blinked, and they were never there. I hesitated, holding the edge of the shed door. The stench was overwhelming. Taking a deep breath into my shirt, I gave it a tug and it opened slowly with a creak. My eyes watered and my jaw hung limp. My cell illuminated only a little at a time. I stood completely still, slowly moving the light left to right my eyes, drinking in the scene. It looked like a wood shop, but in place of tools, there were small, dead animals, hanging from little hooks, rotten and writing with maggots. Auntie had been busy. How could such a sweet old lady fill her late husband's tool shed with this? I felt a tingle run down my back, a laughter in my ear, as faint as the buzz of a fly. There was sudden movement, or so I thought, as if something deeper in the shed suddenly pulled behind a stack of toolboxes. So violently it hit the shed wall. Little dead things spilt from the wall and ceiling. Immediately I was noping my way back across the yard. Little crunches be damned, I was making a break away from this place. I stopped abruptly. The back door hung open. Something pale and human-shaped peeking from behind the screen door that hung behind the heavy wooden one. What did I do, /X/? I kept on running around the gate. I wasn't about to have a sit-down reunion with my dead little cousin. As much as I missed him, I wasn't about to go into that house again in the dead of the morning. I hoofed it out back to my car and sped off down the road. My heart was beating faster than I could count, and it was all but in my throat. I didn't dare check my rear-view mirrors for years in fear that I'd see dark, sunken eyes looking back. I could still smell the damn decay. My foot pressed the gas seemingly on its own. I should have slowed down as I came closer to town, but the little pale face haunted me. I saw it clearly with every blink. I was pushing 65 when I was pulled over in a 30. The sky was a little lighter now, not inky black, but a powder blue, suggesting blessed dawn would soon break, but not quite. The cop seemed shaken when he saw me. He said I was real pale and asked me to step out of my vehicle. He talked to me, calmed me down. I didn't tell him I had seen a ghost. I explained there had been a break-in at my place, and I was scared and in a hurry to get back there, and blah, 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 dealing with my aunt just passing and stuff. He let me off with a warning. I think I freaked him out. He told me to get some sleep. Try as I might, I couldn't rest. The shed, the face, the box, the flies, the laughter, and then mud up to my shins. The stink of death and the smile beaming up from the album. My TV was broken, and I stood in my backyard facing the sunrise, my thoughts racing behind a smoke and my steaming coffee. I coughed and retched after a particularly deep puff. It had been almost a year since my last. I coughed and heard a crash from inside. I almost dropped my mug. I moved slowly up to my sliding glass door. Seeing my reflection, I realized why I had freaked out the cop. My eyes had bags under them. My face was unusually pale and sickly looking. My stubble had that 3-day neglected look, and my hair had come loose and was hanging in odd bunches from the sides. I swallowed dryly and pulled my door open. Slowly it made a worn, grinding noise from years of being pulled open in its aluminum track. What had fallen? Why was this happening? I peered into the dark house, lips drawn tight, ready for a shock. I groped blindly for the wall light, paranoid I'd touched something leathery or dead. The lights flicked on quickly enough, and a raccoon blinked up at me, startled. It ran through the house and went out the way it came in. A small dog door I never patched over when I moved in. It was at the foot of the side entrance that turned into steps. I signed in relief, turned to my table, and it was all I could do not to shout out. That black box was sitting on my table. Opening it again, the letters were gone. The beak and the small black horn rolled on the wood. The hair was everywhere, no longer in the neat short bundle. It looked like something digested by an owl. Disgusted, I shoved the box aside. I crept back into my living room. The raccoon didn't explain the couch being flipped. I sat in the easy chair and allowed myself to close my eyes in the warmly lit room. It felt so safe. Maybe I could just manage a short nap. I was mistaken. I was pulled into a series of long, dark dreams. It felt like I had been out for hours. I found out later it had only been half an hour. The dreams were silent, a deafening silence that buzzed in your ears. like the second before a gun blast or explosion, when the world seems to be drawing a breath for a screaming explosion. I had dreamt of sitting in a cathedral. The pews were packed, people praying and crying. I was standing in line in limbo, breathless appertains from across history. The past and present were wordlessly telling me with their big sad eyes of their demise. They were from the future. They were from the past. One was telling me she was sitting in a cathedral. The pews were packed. It was the rapture. People were praying hard, praying and repenting and passing bowls of holy water. The bowl came into her hands, and at the bottom, a small bead of black starred up at her, and it bloomed, as if a small drop of blood had fallen into it. And it grew and overflowed, a gushing black festering wound. The people before her, raised, their clothing discarded, their wallets, their rosaries. She sat there, unable to move. The back of the church burst open, and two figures silently slid down the aisle. One, a figure that resembled a pig on its hind legs, garbed in a flowing red and black robe with a pope's hat. It leaned heavily on a staff as the second figure. A great smoky shadow hung behind him, dragging itself through the air, filling the pews in its wake. The pig shuffled its way into the pew behind her and started eating a patron behind her. The man screaming, also frozen in his seat. Time twisted fast forward, and we watched the flesh of her arm twist and dry and burst into dust and float away with the rest of the Forsaken. Others approached me too, and told me of what happened to them. This one died in a crusade. Another fell to his death while cleaning a billboard. One was killed in a tool shed. I woke up startled, as if I had been slapped. My front door was open, and my brothers stood before me, looking at me strangely. My younger brother opened his mouth, and something black dribbled onto his chin. I tilted my head and leaned closer to see, and a small, rotted bird fell out. My older brother opened his mouth, and the sound of a door creaking open came out. I woke up for real this time, and there were my brothers gently palming my shoulder to wake me. We had to go back to my aunt's. I didn't think to bring the box back with me. He said the girls and kids were already there with the others. My stomach tightened. What if the kids went in the tool shed? I had to lock that thing up or burn it down or something. When we got there, two kids were in the kitchen, and one was feeling sick and laying with my sister-in-law on the couch. I went to the back door. It was dead bolted. I walked into the backyard. The tool shed door looked closed as ever. Getting closer, I saw the ground was all stamped down from my excursion last night. But it looked like I'd been stomping in a circle. Most of the grass was flat around the shed. I've been feeling sick since that night. I don't like being home alone. I don't like going to my aunt's, and if I see that box again before I die, it'll be too soon. I gave it to my cousin, saying it was her mom's. Maybe we should burn it with her and spread the ashes at her favorite beach or something. She gave me a worried look. So have my brothers. Even my nephews and baby cousin gave me worried looks. So tired. Yet the dreams and nightmares leave me even more exhausted.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.